Yeah, just to mark your card, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, saying today, sign the deal. It's a good deal for America, it's a good deal for Ukraine. I'm not sure President Zelensky sees it that way. It's not mine to give away, he says. We're out of time. We could talk plenty more about all these questions that we've had from our viewers, but Vitaly, James, Nomia, Abdul Jalil in Kyiv, thank you very much indeed for your time. Keep those questions coming in. We'll do another of these sessions very soon because there's a lot to get into, is there not? Thanks very much for watching.
Live from London, this is BBC News. European leaders give their backing to the Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, after President Trump called him a dictator. The US President says he trusts that Moscow does want to see an end to the war and says the Kremlin has the cards in peace talks.
I do. I think the Russians want to see the war end. And I do. I really do. But I think they have the cards a little bit because, you know, they've taken a lot of territory. So they have the cards.
Spain's High Court finds the former head of the country's football federation, Luis Rubiales, guilty of kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent. He intends to appeal. A somber day in Israel as Hamas returns the bodies of 4 dead hostages. The group says they include a mother and her 2 young children. And archaeologists have found the first tomb of a pharaoh to be discovered since Tutankhamun was found more than a century ago. Hello, I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. In the next few minutes, we were expecting President Zelensky to hold a news conference with the American envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who's been meeting with him in Kyiv. But in the last few minutes, that news conference has just been cancelled at the request of the United States. It was going to take place in the wake of all the recent comments from President Trump, who described the Ukrainian leader as a dictator and called for elections to take place in the country. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. The parents of Alice Aguirre have told the BBC their daughter was born to be a star in their first broadcast interview since she was killed in the Southport knife attack last July. 2 other young girls, Elsie Dot Stankham and BB King, also died. Churchtown Primary School, where Alice and BB were pupils, is planning to build a playground in their memory. Sarah Campbell reports. We're going to take you to the US now because the US Vice President J.D. Vance has just started addressing the CPAC conference, the Conservative political grouping. Let's listen in.
Okay, good. Then we're ready. We're ready. But it's a real special day today. You know what today is, guys?
J.D. Vance addressing the Conservative political conference there in the US. Elon Musk is due to be there too. It is a month since Donald Trump was inaugurated in the US, and he was just running through what he felt was some of the successes on immigration, the economy and other areas. We will get more on that soon. Let's catch up now with the sport. Here's Paul Scott.
Thank you very much, Geeta. Good afternoon. Let's start with football. Former Spanish Football Federation President Luis Rubiales has been found guilty of sexual assault and fined €10,000 after kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent after the Women's World Cup final in 2023. And that is all from the world of sport for now. Geeta, back to you.
Well, thanks very much. Paul Scott there. President Trump has said that he believes Russia holds all the cards in talks to end the Ukraine war because Russia has taken a lot of Ukrainian territory. But speaking on Air Force One, he said he trusted Russia to negotiate in good faith and he believed Moscow wanted to stop the fighting. Last night, Victoria Derbyshire spoke to the Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, on Newsnight. He vehemently denied that President Putin wants to take over all of Ukraine. The Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, there speaking to Victoria Derbyshire last night. We'll have much more on this in the next few minutes. Stay with us. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. This is BBC News. Live from London, this is BBC News. The wars of words between the United States and Ukraine continues after President Trump called Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator. The US president says that he trusts Moscow, does want to see an end to the war, and says the Kremlin has the cards in peace talks.
They've taken a lot of territory, so they have the cards.
Work begins to identify the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages released by Hamas. They're believed to include a mother and her 2 young children. Spain's High Court finds the former head of the country's football federation, Luis Rubiales, guilty of kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent. He intends to appeal. Hello, I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. A news conference which was expected between President Zelensky and the American envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who's been meeting with him in Kiev, has been cancelled in the last hour or so. It came at the request of the United States. Guy Hedgecoe there in Madrid. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's get more on events affecting Ukraine-Russia, because at a press conference last week, we heard from President Trump talking about what he was aiming for. And we'll play a little bit of that for you in a few minutes. But I just want to bring you up to date with what's happened today. We were expecting a news conference around an hour ago between Volodymyr Zelensky and the US envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who's meeting with him in Kiev. That was cancelled at the last minute. Congratulations. I know you've got a lot of followers and a lot of fans. Liam Shaw, Zoe Freeman, Jack Holding, thank you all so much, and good luck with all your work. This is BBC News. Do stay with us. We're back soon.
The world's largest plane maker, Airbus, reports net profits of $4.3 billion, an increase of 13% on the previous year. The retail giant Walmart forecasts a drop in sales for the year ahead. And is it a liquid, a solid, or a gas? None of the above. Microsoft invents a new form of matter for the next generation of computing. Welcome to Business Today, live from New York. I'm Ritika Gupta, and we start off with the results for Airbus, the European plane maker that builds and sells more commercial jets than anyone in the world. Net profits in 2024 rose 13% to just over €4 billion, or $4.3 billion. That is all we have time for on Business Today, but do stay with us here on BBC News. Goodbye.
Hello, you're with BBC News. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. Organisers of a women's football tournament in Bangladesh were forced to cancel the event after religious hardliners announced a protest. Well, these are pictures from earlier this month capturing religious extremist groups disrupting the tournament. They say the matches are un-Islamic and go against their religious values. Wildlife vets in Australia have begun euthanising dozens of false killer whales that had become stranded on a remote beach in Tasmania. The animals were part of a pod of more than 150 that were beached on the island's northwestern coast. Rescue efforts were hampered by the weather conditions and the challenging terrain. You're watching BBC News. Here, a record number of people are in hospital in England with the winter vomiting bug norovirus. Figures released today show that flu cases were down slightly, but hospitals say they're still under pressure. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports. Here, museums, galleries and other cultural venues in England are going to receive £270 million of funding from the government to stay afloat and repair buildings. The Culture Secretary is announcing the money will go to attractions in urgent need of financial support, such as the British Museum and the National Gallery. Let's catch up with all the weather. Here's Stav. Live from London, this is BBC News. The US Vice President J.D. Vance calls President Trump the President of Peace, saying he will tackle whatever war breaks out.
Peace is in the interest of Russia, it's in the interest of Ukraine, it's in the interest of Europe, but most importantly, peace is in the interest of the American people.
Work begins to identify the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages released by Hamas. They're believed to include a mother and her 2 young children. The British Army's mishandling of complaints made by a young female soldier who'd been sexually assaulted contributed to her suicide, an inquest has found. Spain's High Court finds the former head of the country's football federation, Luis Rubiales, guilty of kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent. He intends to appeal. Hello, I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. Thanks for being with us. Relations between the United States and Ukraine appear no closer to softening after a planned news conference that President Zelensky and the American envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, was cancelled at the US's request. The pair had earlier held talks in Kiev. It follows comments from Donald Trump, who described the Ukrainian leader as a dictator and called for elections to take place in the country. More on this coming up in a few minutes. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now, the British Army's failure to investigate properly complaints by a young soldier about abuse contributed to the teenager's suicide, a coroner has concluded. The body of gunner Jaisley Beck, who was 19, was found at Larkhill Camp in December 2021. Mark O'Connell, thank you so much for coming in. Great to talk to you. We are back in a few minutes with much more. This is BBC News. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy, and much more, of course, on the website if you want to catch up on that big change in Bonland. See you soon. This is BBC News, the headlines. The US Vice President J.D. Vance calls President Trump the President of Peace, saying he will tackle whatever war breaks out. Work continues to identify the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages released by Hamas. They're believed to include a mother and her 2 young children. The British Army's mishandling of complaints made by a young female soldier who'd been sexually assaulted contributed to her suicide, an inquest has found. Spain's High Court finds the former head of the country's football federation, Luis Rubiales, guilty of kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent. He intends to appeal. And archaeologists have found the first tomb of a pharaoh to be discovered since Tutankhamun was found more than a century ago. More coming up on all of that, plus London Fashion Week. First, let's get all the sport. Here's Hugh. Hi there.
Guru, good afternoon to you. As you've just been mentioning, the former president of Spain's Football Federation has been fined the equivalent of nearly £9,000 after Luis Rubiales was found guilty of sexual assault for kissing player Jenny Hermoso without her consent. Finally, the Europa and Conference League last 16s are decided tonight, much like the Champions League over the last couple of nights. The playoff second legs of both those 2 competitions later. 8 of them, though, are about to get underway. You can follow it all on the BBC Sport website. And Jane Dougal will be here for Sports Day at 6:30. But that's it from me. Back to you.
Hugh, thanks very much. Hugh Ferris there with all the sport. Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey is in Norway meeting his Norwegian counterpart. Mr Healey talked about the close relationship between Norway and the UK and announced a new defence pact between the 2 countries. He also spoke about Ukraine and European security during a news conference with his Norwegian counterpart. Amazing find there. Just to let you know, President Zelensky has been meeting with Keith Kellogg of the US advisor, and he says Ukraine is ready for strong and useful agreement with the US on investments and security. He said that they had a productive meeting with the Trump envoy and saying that they're going to work 24/7 on this. We might find out more at a White House press briefing, which is due to start in a few minutes. You're with BBC News. I'm Geeta.
Hello there. Big changes to our weather now. You would have noticed just how mild it was when you stepped